While other banknote collectors are struggling to buy one or two notes, we note-geld collectors are straight up balling. We're sitting here with piles of 100-plus-year-old beautiful banknotes, and we don't even have to sell our kidneys to do it. You can still buy German note-geld banknotes at prices that are much lower than other banknotes of the same age, condition, rarity, and beauty. There are a number of reasons for this, even though the notes are exceptionally rare. First of all, the sheer number of different notes that were issued. Secondly, understandably, Germans might not be as excited about collecting items from their past as people in other countries. Third, German note-geld banknotes were the world's first banknote collecting craze. This meant collectors kept the notes in albums, and they were well preserved, and many more of them were saved by collectors compared to boring old cash. But I would argue that the primary reason note-geld is so undervalued relative to the rest of the world banknote market is simply that they were excluded from the main catalogs. Which leads me to ask, what if it was possible to conduct a scientific experiment to find out what would happen to prices if note-geld were included in these primary banknote catalogs and more collectors were exposed to it? I would argue that just such an experiment actually has been conducted. There are a few cities who, through some twist of fate, were considered independent countries at the time they issued their note-geld. Because of this, only note-geld from those cities are included in all of the standard world paper money catalogs, not just specialized note-geld catalogs or the less well-known standard catalog of specialized issues, which includes inflation note-geld issued by quasi-federal Reichsbahn railroad authorities and a small semi-random assortment of note-geld issued at the German state level. This sets up a perfect scientific test because we have a control group, the note-geld that isn't included in those catalogs, and then we have the note-geld that is included in those catalogs, like Danzig. Not that Danzig. I'm talking about the city of Danzig, or Gdansk, as it's called today as a city in Poland. Between 1920 and 1939, Danzig was technically a free city-state administered by the League of Nations. In other words, it was a city and it was a country. This means that in the 1970s, when the first predecessors of the world banknote catalogs we have today were coming out, the German note-geld banknotes issued by this city were included because they were considered to be country-level currency, as this was the criteria they came up with for inclusion. This is a classification decision made by those catalog authors that has had enormous positive consequences for the prices of those notes. That's because, as a general rule, note-geld issued at the city level is much rarer than the standard country-level banknotes. So by world banknote standards, Danzig notes are extremely rare. But Danzig was a pretty big city that did a lot of trade, and so by note-geld standards, Danzig notes aren't actually all that rare. In fact, if we look at what is still today the standard catalog for inflation note-geld, we can see that in 1958, the catalog prices for most Danzig notes was between half a mark and 2 marks, which, according to the exchange rate at the time, was between 12 and 48 American cents. A couple of the rarest variants were valued at 3 and 5 marks, or between 72 cents and $1.19. Even adjusted for inflation, this means that the catalog price for most Danzig notes was between $1.30 and $5.25 in 2024 dollars. Now, there are plenty of other notes in that same catalog whose prices are 5, 10, 20, or even 40 times higher than the Danzig notes, and some are so rare they have an R for rare instead of a price. And the prices hadn't changed much by 1971 when that fateful Elbert Pick catalog came out, including Danzig while excluding most other note-geld. Many of the Danzig inflation notes still had prices as low as 50 cents in that catalog. But they had something far more important, their own chapter in Pick's book. Now, if you are familiar with the catalog prices for Danzig note-geld today, then you already know where I'm going with this. The prices for Danzig notes today are astronomical in comparison with these 1958 and 1971 prices. You can go online yourself and verify this with me because there's a great price guide for world banknotes available free online from PMG, the premier banknote grading service. I'll put a link in the description down below so you can check it out. Now, if we look at this chart of these prices, we can see that the 1,000 mark was 48 cents in 1958 in the Keller catalog. 1971 Pick, it had gone up to $1.50, but today, in the 2024 PMG online catalog, you can see yourself, it's $600. Now, P20, the 50,000 mark, went from 71 cents to only $1.50 from 1958 to 1971, but once it made it into that 1971 catalog, Boom, the prices exploded, and we have it here in 2024 for $900. Similarly, the 1 million mark went from 36 cents to $1 between 58 and 71, but in 2024, $1,000 catalog value. Similarly, the 500 million mark, 18 cents in 1958, 50 cents in 1971, today, $900. This 500 million mark note represents a 500,000% increase in price, and even if we adjust it for inflation, that's still a 45,000% increase. Meanwhile, the catalog prices for No Guild in our control group, those which were excluded from Pick's catalog and the subsequent catalogs that have adopted his numbers and system, have stagnated. Adjusted for inflation, many of them have actually decreased. Now, you could argue that there are other factors affecting the price and that Danzig is special for some reason. So for the purposes of comparison, let's take an especially special example. Now, here's a note that has a lot going for it. It's a 1 million mark bleeding all-seeing eye banknote issued by the city of Itzehoe, also from 1923, like the Danzig notes. Based on the low serial numbers and the fact that I've never even come across an uncirculated one, even though I've purchased nearly every copy I've found over the last 10 years, I would argue that it is at least as rare as your average Danzig note and probably significantly rarer. And the art is not only extremely striking, one of the most poignant depictions of the suffering of the Germans due to inflation, but the artist is also arguably the most famous artist to create No Geld, Wenzel Hablich. He was a modernist artist far ahead of his time, and many of his pieces wouldn't look out of place among today's digital art creations. So the note has both numismatic value and value to art collectors, which we all know can be quite significant. This note was valued at 1 mark in the 1958 catalog, or 24 American cents. I believe the highest price ever realized for this note was achieved in one of our auctions, and it was the finest example I have come across, which sold for $86 on December 28, 2023. Nonetheless, it is possible to find examples in lesser condition that have sold for under $10 in Germany, although why anyone would be willing to part with it for so little is beyond me. However, if this note had been included in the major catalogs like the Danzig notes in every major catalog since the 1970s, then I think we could expect a similar price increase would have occurred. And if that had happened, this note today would have a catalog value of approximately $1,200, perhaps even higher, given the artistry and the artistic pedigree, if only it were on collectors' radar. Of course, it's up to you what to collect, but I personally would rather buy something that is significantly undervalued rather than something that's comparatively overvalued due to artificial distortions in the market. I've always felt that being a contrarian is the essence of smart market timing. You want to buy when people are selling and sell when people are buying. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that No Geld is the ultimate undervalued contrarian numismatic play. Now, please subscribe if you want more content like this because we're just getting started.